Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. This video is a continuation of the Count of Monte Cristo, a story told by Alexander Dumas, retold by Beatrice Conway. Chapters 8 to 10. Chapter 8. The Chiadif. There was a part of Chiadif where the most dangerous and the mad prisoners were kept. This was deep down beneath the fortress in the dungeons. Here in a cell, Dantes was locked up. Once in the morning and once in the evening, his door was opened a few inches, just enough for the jailer to push through a plate with some bad food and a small jug of water. Then it was locked again. Dantes could not see any other living soul inside the dungeons. He could not understand why he had been imprisoned without a trial. For a year he lived in hope that Villefort might come to know of the mistake that had happened, that has been made, and would order his release. Poor Dantes did not know that it was the assistant state prosecutor himself who had ordered him to be locked away. A second year passed. Dantes knew nothing of the outside world. He saw only the four walls of his cell and the jailer who brought his food. A third year passed. Then a fourth year. Dantes could now no longer remember whether he was innocent or guilty. His mind was not clear, and he was certainly going mad. In the fifth year of his imprisonment, Dantes ragged against his jailers and against the unknown persons who had caused him to be locked away in this dreadful place. His wild actions made him feared by the jailers, and they thought him as a mad and as dangerous as all other prisoners in the dungeons. At the end of 6 years, Dantes had no wish to live. He decided to take his own life by starving himself to death. So, twice a day when his food was brought to him, he threw it away through a small air hole in the wall of the cell. He became weaker and weaker until he had not the strength to rise from his bed. He was almost dying. As he lay on the bed, he listened to the noises of the prison one morning. They were no longer strange to him, for he had come to know even the smallest sounds around him. He could hear the drip of the water on the ceiling above him. He could hear the scamper of the rats as they ran around the prison. He could even hear the soft movements of the spider weaving its web in the corner of his cell. One evening, he heard a strange new sound, a scratching noise behind the wall of his cell. It went on for some time and then stopped. Shortly before the jailer arrived with his plate of food, it sounded as though another prisoner was making a tunnel through which to escape. Dantes could hardly believe it. Now Dantes began to think once more about living instead of dying. Another prisoner could build a tunnel and try to escape. Why shouldn't we? This is a thought process going into the minds of Dantes after 6 long years. He started to eat his food again, regain his lost strength. As soon as he felt strong enough, he looked around his cell for some tool with which to scrap the wall to loosen the stones. There was nothing at all. He needed a piece of iron. The only object made of iron which ever came into his cell was the saucepan in which the jailer sometimes brought the thin watery soup, which was all the prisoners had to keep them alive. The jailer would pour the soup into the plate and go away again with the saucepan. This gave Dantes a very brilliant idea. The next evening, before the jailer arrived, he placed a soup plate on the ground near the door of the cell. The jailer opened the door with his heavy key and put his foot into the opening right on the top of the plate. The plate broke into 100 pieces. He grumbled at Dantes for having left it on the ground and looked around for something else into which to pour the soup. There was nothing. Leaving the saucepan to Dante's, when he would bring breakfast, he thought he shall take off it again. As soon as his cell door was locked, Dantes quickly drank the soup, set to work. With the handle of a saucepan, he scraped away the mortar round one of the stones in the wall. By the morning, stone was free. Dantes put back the stone in its place before the jailer arrived. Dantes could scrap away many mortar with the handle of the saucepan. Dantes could not believe his good fortune. He thanked heaven for the piece of iron. As soon as the jailer had left the cell, Dantes picked up the saucepan and started working again. He removed the stone he had already loosened and began scrapping in space behind it. He toiled on and on until he had made a hole big enough to crawl into. Putting his head and shoulders through his hole, he pulled away the earth behind it. Suddenly, he found himself inside the tunnel which his fellow prisoner was making. He started to crawl along it. Turning a corner, he heard a soft, shuffling noise. Someone was crawling towards him from the other side of the tunnel. He lay still, trying not to stir or breathe. The noise came nearer and then stopped. In the darkness of the tunnel, Dantes could feel the stranger's breath upon his face. For the first time, after more than 6 years alone in his cell in Ciudad, Dantes was face to face with another prisoner. Chapter 9. The Two Prisoners. After this first meeting, the two prisoners made nightly visits to each other's cell, taking care to be back before the jailer came to bring their food. Dantes learned that his fellow prisoner's name was Abbe Faria. He was an Italian priest who had been a prisoner in Ciudad since 1808, 7 years longer than Dantes. He was a small man, aged not by years but by sorrow and misery in which he had lived. His hair was long and white and his face was marked by suffering. Before his imprisonment, Father Faria had been secretary to Cardinal Spada in Rome. After the cardinal's death, he was arrested and accused of plotting against the state. That was why he was a prisoner in Ciudad. He had been placed among the mad prisoners in dungeons because he was always talking about the great treasure he possessed. He had even promised some of his treasure to the jailer if he would help him to escape from the prison. But everyone knew that he had neither wealth nor possessions. Father Faria was a very learned man. He spoke many languages and had a greater knowledge of mathematics, science, medicine and literature. Making the tools which he had used for tunneling, he had made pens, ink and paper. From fish bones, ink from suet, which he dissolved in a little wine while he managed to beg from his jailer. When he had no ink, he even cut himself, used his blood to write with. He made paper from his shirts, specially treated with a liquid he had invented, which made linen as smooth as parchment. With these materials, he had written a book. Besides all these things, he had made needles, knives from small bones, and a ladder to escape from sheets. He told Dantes that he had hoped to use this ladder when his tunnel reached the outside of the fortress. He would lower it over walls or high rocks and could then escape by jumping into sea. This is how he had made his own plans to escape from the dungeons. Instead of reaching the outside prison, his tunnel had led only to Dante's cell. This was a great gain to Abbe Faria. Chapter 10. Faria solves the mystery. Dantes wondered, how could a person be so clever and wise like Abbe Faria? He told the priest the story of his wedding day. He told him how the soldiers had arrested him, how he had been locked in Ciudad after the assistant state prosecutor had promised to set him free. He asked Faria whether he could understand what had happened and what was his mystery of his misfortunes. And Dante asked Faria to solve his unanswered questions. After Dante had finished speaking, Faria thought carefully and discovered the mystery one by one. Everyone is of same importance. Whether Dante's was that important in Pharaoh was the first question asked by Faria to Dante's. And Dante's replied that he had over quarrel nature with Danglers, the supercargo. So, his first enemy is the Danglers. Then he questioned Dante's whether anyone else knew that he had landed on the island of Elba, about the letter and other things that had happened on that day. And Dante's was clearly explained him that Danglers must have seen him with the letter, and he had something to do with the accusation which was sent to state prosecutor. Then Dante's asked about his marriage with Mercedes, and he asked a question whether anyone else was interested to marry her or to prevent the marriage. And Dante's answered that her cousin Ferdinand loved her, but Mercedes and Dante's were together to get married. And by this, Faria came to a conclusion: Ferdinand would be the next person to take revenge on Dante's. Then there was a question about the neighbor Cadrazzo. And finally, Faria has made 3 people to be the cause of Dante's visit to the prison. And Dante's also remembered that Cadrazzo, Danglers and Ferdinand were at the Hotel La Reserve when Dante's was speaking with Mercedes. Now he understood half of the story, what would have happened to him, with the help of Father Faria. Next, Dante's asks a question that how he could be condemned to be imprisoned without a trial. And now the priest answers that the state prosecutor who questioned him is a young man about 27 years. And was he ambitious, or how was his treatment? And for this, Dante's replied he was an honest man. He assured him for his rescue from the prison, but he gave a different mannerism when he was examining the letter. And by this, Faria understood that there was something in the letter which made a facial change upon the assistant state prosecutor. Then Dante's replied that after going through the letter, assistant state prosecutor had also burned and informed him not to let out any issues regarding the letter. This action was almost too kind to be natural, but Faria had a doubt why he has to destroy the letter. So he examined and finally asked him to whom the letter had been addressed. And Dante's thought for a while, and he replied that it to be that letter addressed was to Noirtier. Hearing the name Noirtier, Faria repeated again, "Is it Noirtier? I knew a French diplomat of that name in Italy," was the answer from Abbe Faria. Then he informed that he had been a nobleman before the revolution and had changed his name as Noirtier. Now, the next question that Abbe Faria asked to Dante's was whether he could remember the name of the assistant state prosecutor. And now Dante's replied to him that the assistant state prosecutor's name was Villefort. Hearing this name, Faria burst out laughing louder, and Dante did not know the issue of Faria's laughter. And finally now, Faria replied, "There is no wonder. That good man destroyed your letter and told you for your own good never to mention the name of Noirtier. Do you know who is this Noirtier? This Noirtier de Villefort is his own father." Thus, Faria solves the mystery of Dante's misfortunes. Thank you.